People from around the world are joining Ukraine's war effort.
Thousands of foreigners have now answered the call of the Ukrainian president to pack up their things and pick up a gun and come and fight alongside Ukraine.
Today on The Nexus, we're looking at the role foreign fighters are playing in defending Ukraine from Russia, which began its attack almost exactly 2 months ago. Ukraine's government says something like 20,000 people from abroad have arrived in the country to help them resist the Russians. Many are from America, Canada, and Britain, and they've usually got some form of combat experience. They seem well-intentioned, but are they actually going to be able to help? We've heard of a number of young, naive people with no experience at all going over and finding themselves overwhelmed. And another point, are they acting within the law, both internationally and domestically? What happens if they kill abroad? Could they be prosecuted? It's a risk for them, but one they're willing to take.
Якщо ви в Європі маєте бойовий досвід, прибути до нашої держави і разом з нами захищати Європу. Де це зараз дуже потрібно.
This is not just a fight for Ukrainian people. This is a fight for all of us.
People from around the world are joining Ukraine's war effort.
In fact, there are actually about 20,000 of them, either in training or already on the battlefield.
Ukraine has established an international legion for volunteers from abroad, and Zelensky has publicly urged foreigners to fight side by side with Ukrainians.
They're not just accepting any volunteers, though. You do have to be able to prove that you have some kind of prior training or experience.
Are you worried?
I am absolutely worried, yes. But I'm more worried for the people there who are not able to leave.
I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest, but at the same time, like, it's not about me, it's about the people that are suffering there.
I've been setting my mind of why I'm going, and I know it's a just cause.
I have little medical training, but in a pinch, I can be backup.
Russia's military warned foreign fighters they'd be treated as mercenaries, not as protected combatants under international law.
This is not mercenaries who are coming to earn money, not at all. This is people of goodwill who are coming to assist Ukraine to fight for freedom.
I think the realities of war, if you head out to the front, is going to be pretty overwhelming. So I think you've got to know what you're potentially looking at getting yourself into.
The statement from the Russian military was chilling. They said that any foreign mercenary, that was their word, coming to help Ukraine would, quote, not enjoy the status of prisoner of war. They will not be captured, they will be killed.
Is this something you're prepared to die for?
Yes.
Well, we spoke to Kevin Midmore, who is a former British soldier and who's been to northwestern Ukraine to deliver first aid equipment, food and other resources to military aid posts. During his time there, he spoke to some foreign fighters, and here's what he's observed.
The foreign fighters, especially the veterans, they'll be motivated enough because they will be highly trained, whether they're from the British Army, the American Army, or the Europeans. They'll have the motivation, they'll have the skill set. As with the equipment, it's the same as anything. There's a lot of people going. So they might be struggling to get all the equipment they want. They're going to go there with the motivation and the skill set. But if they haven't got the weapons to carry out what they're trained to do, then that might be a case of they might get a little bit demoralized like that.
Well, interestingly, Russia's President Vladimir Putin condemned Ukraine for encouraging foreigners to join the fight, and then said Russia would resort to the same tactic.
Спонсоры украинского режима не скрывают этого, они это делают в открытую, пренебрегая всякими нормами международного права. Поэтому, если вы видите, что есть люди, которые хотят на добровольной основе, тем более не за деньги, приехать и оказать помощь людям, проживающим на Донбассе, ну что же, надо пойти им навстречу и помочь им перебраться в зону боевых действий.
Putin and his defense minister claimed around 16,000 foreigners had applied to fight, most reportedly from the Middle East, especially Syrians with experience in urban warfare. Syria's regime is, of course, an ally of Russia, which supported it during the conflict there. There are also reports of thousands of troops from the Russian Republic of Chechnya participating in Russia's attack on Ukraine. And then there's the so-called Wagner Group. They're not foreigners, but they are mercenaries, typically Russian veterans, who are trying to make a little extra money. They're said to number 1,000 men. Well, let's bring in our guest now. In the top left, we have Damien McGrew. He's a spokesman for Ukraine's International Legion, which was set up to recruit and process foreign fighters. He's in Lviv in western Ukraine. We also have Amber Schultz, who's a journalist with Australia's Crikey News. She's been covering the refugee situation along Ukraine's western border and has met a number of foreign fighters along the way. She's currently on assignment in Romania. John Barton is a former US Marine who now runs a company supplying real military props to film sets. He's donated nearly $1 million worth of supplies to the volunteers and to Ukraine's army fighting in Ukraine. Samuel Pitchford is a lawyer who writes for Human Rights Pulse, an online platform publishing the latest news in human rights and international law. Welcome to all of you. Damien McGrew, if I may start with you. Ordinarily, before this attack happened, you were a lawyer helping to introduce business into Ukraine, and then suddenly this happened and your life changed and you've helped establish the Ukraine International Legion. Tell us why you did that.
I could start by saying that I'm not the only one whose life was affected by this. Indeed, I'm just one of many people living in Ukraine who've had to deal with a fairly sudden change of life circumstances. My engagement is, all things considered, rather relative to what a number of very courageous Ukrainian men and women have done by enlisting and actually going to the front, because I'm having mostly support functions in the Legion. The reason why I decided to enlist is because I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. From the very first days of the war, there was really horrendous war crimes being committed, and in a way, Kiev is my home too. So I felt that I could do something, I could contribute to the war effort in Ukraine, and then I should do it.
Okay, what is the purpose? It seems self-evident, but I'd like to hear it from you anyway. What is the purpose of Ukraine's International Legion?
So our assignment, as has been set by the President of Ukraine, is to welcome, receive international volunteers coming from abroad and assess their suitability to serve in the military, and for those that are selected, to equip them and prepare them and send them to the front as soon as practically possible.
To date, can you give us any reasonably concrete numbers as to the number of people from overseas who have come to Ukraine to fight?
I'm afraid we don't comment on numbers at all.
Okay, and can you tell me predominantly which countries make up the International Legion?
Sure. So the most represented nationalities that we have are Americans and Brits by quite a margin. And then after them come Poland and Canada. And if you take them as groups, the Baltic countries and the Nordic countries are also quite strongly represented.
And have they made a material difference? Have they helped?
I can absolutely say they have made a difference. We have a number of combat units that have been deployed at various points in the front, most of whom I cannot, of course, divulge the location of where they're taking part in activities. But what I can say is that our legionnaires were very involved in the liberation of Irpin, and they were also among the very first Ukrainian troops to enter Bucha.
Do they tend to be veterans from their own armies, or in addition, do we have a lot of naive people turning up and not knowing what to do?
Well, people from the second category do not come into the International Legion. We're now only accepting people with prior combat experience. And it goes without saying that people with that kind of experience are normally veterans of their own military. Most of our recruits come from NATO countries, and so most of the experience that they've gained in the past comes from either Iraq or Afghanistan, in some cases Libya or Syria. Obviously, some French recruits that have more experience from African theaters of war, where they might have been deployed with the French military.
Do they tell you what motivates them to enlist?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously every person has their own motivation. What I have noticed every single Legionnaire saying is something along the lines of what I started by saying, which is that there is a common feeling of powerlessness when you watch things happening from a distance, and that given the seriousness of the war and the way it's being conducted by the Russian forces, it's a very common explanation from our Legionnaires that they could just not stand by and watch, and they felt they had to do something.
I think it was last month, the president said that something like 16,000 people had signed up. Of course, that was early in March. I appreciate you don't want to give out numbers now, but in a country of over 40 million people, they would seem to be a drop in the ocean. But you're saying that they are needed.
Well, what is the case, and of course I won't comment on the numbers, but what is the case is that our recruits are very experienced and know their way around a battlefield. They're also very familiar with some of the weapon systems that have been delivered to Ukraine by NATO countries, and are therefore in a very good position to use them and to use their skills on the battlefield, sometimes with a higher effectivity than what regular Ukrainian forces might be able to do. And so what we've seen is that our Legionnaires are being deployed to some of the hottest spots on the front, and therefore I can quite safely say that yes, they have had an impact. They are making a difference as we speak. The argument that you're saying about being a drop in the ocean, well, I'll let others be the judge of that. I think we all have to do our contribution to the maximum of our abilities, and I know that's what our Legionnaires are doing on the front.
Are there any challenges incorporating foreigners into your fighting forces?
I mean, obviously, there's always going to be challenges as soon as you have people from various backgrounds and nationalities and languages. On the whole, though, I would say it has gone surprisingly well and with surprisingly little friction in terms of language barrier or anything like that. All the feedback I'm getting from Ukrainian commanders on the ground who have gotten Legionnaires integrated into their units are saying that they're doing excellent work, and hopefully it will continue this way.
Are they being trained at all? Are they being treated well, provided for in terms of food and equipment and helmets and bulletproof vests and so on?
So I'll make that very clear once and for all. The Legion has never and will never send anyone to the battlefield without a standard military kit, including body armor and a helmet and weapons. There's been a lot of disinformation going around about this. As far as the level of comfort and equipment is concerned, what I can say is that our troops are receiving the same treatment as Ukrainian troops, which obviously, because of the reality on the ground, sometimes is not as adequate as we would like in terms of food and so on. We've had some comments, but really it's the best that can be done in the circumstances, and it's in any case the same treatments that Ukrainian servicemen are receiving.
Russia has sort of threatened, if you like, to treat them particularly badly, certainly not with the same level of respect as normal combatants would have, if they're captured. Are you aware of that threat? And if so, can anything be done to mitigate that?
Well, of course, we are aware that the Russian authorities and the armed forces have said they would consider our Legionnaires to be mercenaries and therefore not entitled to Geneva Convention rights, which we would maintain is a grossly incorrect interpretation of the Geneva Conventions. We would maintain that all of our Legionnaires are members of the standing armed forces of Ukraine within the meaning of Article 3 of the Third Geneva Convention. And I'm sure we'll get into the legal aspects later on, since I heard you had a legal expert on the panel. But whatever erroneous interpretation of the Geneva Conventions the Russian armed forces are deciding to apply should not really be a surprise, given the very extensive violations of humanitarian law that we've seen at the hands of the Russian forces. So is there anything that can be done to mitigate this? Well, apart from really increasing awareness of the status of lawful combatant under the Geneva Conventions and continuing to maintain our legal interpretation, which we believe to be the correct one, I don't know what else can be done to force the Russian army to respect international law. If someone has the solution to this, then I'd be very happy to hear it.
Amber Schultz, you've been covering the refugee crisis for your news organization, and in doing that job, you've come across a number of foreign fighters. What has been your experience of them?
It's been really interesting. I met up with the foreign fighters in Kochawa. There's a hotel and a restaurant where a lot of them go and meet and unofficially sort of hang out and cross the border together. I think the main concern, or the main thing that really struck me, was just how little information a lot of these foreign fighters had going across. They knew that they had to meet, they knew just through word of mouth that they had to meet at this restaurant and then cross the border, find a white tent. And from there it was, you know, they had no idea what was going to happen. They had no idea what was to be expected or what awaited them. There were rumors their passports might be taken off them. There were, of course, rumors or concerns they would be treated as mercenaries if they were taken. There have been allegations that they've been used as cannon fodder or sent to the front line. So I think it was just massively concerning that so few of them knew what they were in for and just wanted to get across the border as soon as possible.
And did they mention the attempting to join Ukraine's International Legion, or were they just going to try to get across the border and participate in whatever way they could?
No, they were trying to join the Legion. So while there are avenues online to join and sort of be a bit vetted, they had all tried and they hadn't heard back. So they just decided to go across and find someone face to face. But there were no phone numbers, there was no names. There was just get across and find the white tent with Legion spray painted on it in red paint.
Damien, could you just answer those 2 points? One was that some of them were concerned their passports would be taken, and the other one was a sort of a general chaos that they experienced in terms of no telephone numbers and just a tent with the word Legion painted on it.
Of course. So as to the allegations of us taking passports away, those are entirely untrue. We only ever take a copy of their passport, and they have their passports with them at all times, though I do appreciate there's a lot of disinformation going around about this. As regards the general level of information of the people coming into the country, I think the examples you're referring to are people that have taken the trip into their own hands, as you said, that they couldn't hear back from the embassy. That is part of the reason, because the normal process going forward is that they receive a response to their application from the Ukrainian embassy in their country of residence, which includes information as to how to get to the Legion and contact details. Obviously, when they haven't waited the proper course for their application to be processed, they can't be surprised afterwards to have lacking information. This being said, we do assess people as they come in, and normally when they cross the border they are met by volunteers from the International Legion that know how to spot them and how to approach them, and then offer them assistance to get onward with their journey and come to our recruitment center.
Damien, I appreciate there's a war on and these are exceptional circumstances, but do you have any resources or time to do background checks on these people, for example, if they are criminals in their own country?
Yes, of course. So we have several tiers of background checks. The first one being conducted by the Ukrainian embassy and especially the Ukrainian defense attaché in their country of residence. We obviously do not move forward with applications where there are red flags or any sort of criminal background. Once they get to Ukraine, there is also a very thorough individual assessment that is made of every recruit, which includes further background checks, mostly done by Ukrainian intelligence, though in some cases I hear we are getting input from intelligence communities in their home countries as well.
Amber, the types of men, I presume they're mostly men, that you've met there who have become foreign fighters or wanted to be foreign fighters. Can you tell us, were they generally experienced people, veterans, or were some of them naive and absolutely not clear of what they were getting themselves into?
So I spoke to about 7 different men. Again, as you say, all men, no women were that I found were heading to the front line. Of the ones in the hotel, all of them had combat experience. They all were able to talk about it and show me badges or certain things from the, dog tags from their time, but they had all been out of active duty, if not for a couple of years, for a long period of time. There was other men that I found at Medica border crossing who were dissuaded from joining after speaking to others, where it wasn't clear what experience they had. I asked about dog tags, I asked about, where they served, who they served with, and they weren't able to answer the question. So while most of them did seem to have combat experience, there is a question about how recent that experience is and whether they could prove it.
John Barton, you have an interesting story. You normally provide military props to movie sets, and you train various movie stars to act in sort of military films, people like Tom Cruise and a couple of others I can barely remember. But you've also given over $1 million worth of supplies to the Ukrainian military and volunteer fighters. What moved you to do that?
Yeah, we got into this, I wouldn't say late. It was a few days after the war had started, and the big ask was the United States military wasn't going to volunteer weapons, or I'm sorry, uniforms or body armor or anything of that nature. And the ask to me was, I mean, you have this stuff. Would you mind donating a couple things? And I thought, I mean, yeah, I've got tons of this stuff. I'll donate as much as I can. And it was funny you mentioned a drop in the ocean. I probably put together 1,000 sets of uniforms and body armor and boots and helmets and everything. And I always, to this day, feel like it's just a drop in the ocean. I mean, just what's 1,000 sets of body armor going to do? Well, ultimately, to the person that, one of those 1,000 people that get it, it's probably going to help. But I really wish we could do more. Same with the Ukrainian Legion volunteers. They came to me late. I had already shipped out a majority of our combat equipment to the Ukrainian military. Then they contacted me off LinkedIn from an article they had read about me and asked, look, we've reached out to every contractor who, boot maker and weapon maker and helmet maker, and they're not going to let us have anything, and nor do we have time to get stuff. So I stepped in and intervened and started next day shipping out to these guys stuff right before their plane rides, just to try to supplement whatever they were missing off their gear list. So yeah, that's kind of how we got involved. Yeah, all my stuff is real military, top end, highest level of protection you can buy, and we use it for our actors. If for example, if I'm training Chris Hemsworth for our movie, I train him as legitimately as humanly possible with all the real equipment so that he feels like he's getting, a few months worth of military practical training before we go and make fantasy. Ultimately,
I guess as a
I own
former
equipment, it's equipment.
I guess as a former U.S. Marine, you're well placed to train people like that.
Sure.
Have you had any feedback from the Ukrainians about the supplies you've sent?
I haven't gotten much. Our international shipping company that we used for this was Meast, and they've given me some feedback from their logistics network. A lot of the stuff crossed the border and immediately started making its way toward Lviv and then into Kyiv. And from what I understand, it was well received, particularly the body armor we had sent, because we were the first group to ever send any type of body armor to them.
Understood. Look, we're coming towards the end of the program, Samuel, and we need to get to the legal aspect of this. You've been looking at the law in the United Kingdom and in the United States and Canada and, of course, Ukraine. People will ask, is it legal for people of those citizens of those countries to go and fight in Ukraine? What is the answer, country by country?
Well, for Britain and Canada, the answer is the same. In Britain, we have the Foreign Enlistment Act 1870. In Canada, it's 1937, but the same act. And it's unlawful for a British person or a Canadian person to join a foreign army that's engaged with any country that Britain or Canada is not at war with itself, unless a royal proclamation is made or an order is made in council. So any British or Canadian citizen who has traveled to the Ukraine is potentially in breach of the Foreign Enlistment Act. And
yet, sorry, just to jump in there, and yet we have British politicians like the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, actually encouraging people and welcoming their contributions.
Well, I think she may not have looked at the law before she made that comment. But it's a 2-year imprisonment in Britain and a fine.
And the likelihood of that actually being enforced?
Well, it's highly unlikely. The act has never been used. It was contemplated being used for British citizens who went away to the Spanish Civil War, but it was never used in the end because of evidential difficulties. But that might be different nowadays, given the prevalence of social media and other electronic evidence that could prove someone's enrollment.
And the United States, I think you were getting to that.
Yeah, for the United States, it's different. They have a Neutrality Act which prevents Americans from raising a military force in the United States to then take abroad. However, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, back at the time of the Bay of Pigs invasion, interpreted the Neutrality Act as saying, well, that doesn't prevent Americans from leaving the United States to go and fight for a cause that they believe in. So in the case of Americans, it's probably legal, providing that they are leaving the country and then joining another armed forces, as opposed to raising an army in the United States itself.
Given that the United States, Canada, and Britain have put so much effort into supplying weapons to Ukraine, it would be very difficult to see any circumstances under which the British authorities would prosecute anyone going to Ukraine, but they could.
They could. The likelihood, obviously, is that it would provoke a public backlash. And of course, any person being prosecuted under the Foreign Enlistment Act in Britain would say, well, the Foreign Secretary said it was okay. So I can see defense counsels probably running that argument.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for. Thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our other episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week, then, goodbye.